And a warm welcome back to Northampton College. I'm James, and we're doing our Scania 113 to 143 V8 conversion. So today we've got our engine out, and we're going to service work, generally tidy the engine up. Let's remember this is a conversion, it's not a restoration. So we haven't gone to town stripping the engine down, cleaning up all the components, replacing everything that needs doing. We're just converting this truck from a 6-cylinder to a V8. And that's what we're doing today. We're going to do some paint. We're looking at the oil pressure switch, some of the gaskets that need replacing, that just signs of weeping, things like the rocker cover gaskets, the valve clearances. We've got a cracked turbo base manifold. Signs.
1231, that's the part number, and it's got G260. I think that relates to the flow. It's a Bendix. So on there we have KZ1231 and G260. That's got GK260 or GR, but that, as far as I'm concerned, is the same compressor. Absolutely remarkable, mate.
So this was at that really messy point where there's just, excuse my language, crap everywhere. And you're looking over at the truck and there's no engine in there, and you've got this engine on the floor and there's sections of wiring harness, there's pipes. It's just a real mess in the workshop. So this is at that pivotal point, that peak of junk everywhere, and we just start to put it all back together. That shot there shows the compressor from the 6-cylinder going on to the V8. Really lucky. These Scanias are amazing because most of the parts in a service perspective are interchangeable. I found the clutch was interchangeable. The compressor was the same part number with one letter suffix that was different, and that suffix related to the drive gear. So I swapped the 6-cylinder and V8 drive gears on the compressor over, and the compressor went straight in. I checked the technical specifications of both compressors for flow and efficiency and all the rest of it, identical. So I've been really lucky. The engine on the 6-cylinder had been rebuilt not that long ago in terms of kilometers rather than age. So the compressor was really good. The previous guy who owned the truck said to me how quick it used to build up air, seconds. So I knew it was a good compressor. Do some valve clearances, and why, from a technical perspective, students ask, why do we need to do valve clearances? Well, you've got this device, this intake and exhaust valves, and of course, being at the top of the engine, they soak up lots of heat. So as they're expanding, there's a working tolerance, a gap that's critical. And if that gap from the rocker that is pressing down on the valve to open it, if that gap isn't there, then the valve will stick open. Now, when the valve sticks open, one, you're going to get a misfire, but two, it's going to overheat because it needs to touch, that valve actually needs to touch the valve seat in the cylinder head to dissipate its heat. And if it can't do that, you're then going to have a burnt out valve. So starts with a misfire and then you end up with a burnt out valve. So from a service perspective, doing valve clearances is critical. So this is where things get really nice. So every day is counting now, and it just looks so nice at the end of each day. You've no longer got all this junk all over the place. You've now starting to see all these building blocks go together. The engine's now sitting in the chassis. It's painted. During COVID, you can imagine there was a lot of companies that just didn't have any work, or students from a college perspective as well. And parts and paint and all these nice special points to get this very original just couldn't get. I just struggled. I could not get Scania green. So I had to make a decision and look at what paints I could get. So I think this is a General Motors blue, and I've seen lots of 50s and 60s Chevrolets with this sort of colour on the engines. So I went for that colour, and actually it's turned out quite nice. So maybe in the future, if we take the engine out again, maybe to rebuild it or do something like that, now that we can get this Scania green paint. We might consider painting it green, but I think it looks really nice. There's something really nice about seeing a truck engine all painted on the floor before it goes into the chassis. There's nothing like it. It just looks amazing. You can really make that engine pop. And then looking at it from there, when we built it up, we've put the fan on and the air conditioning compressor, the alternator, and all these extra ancillary parts, it starts to look something. So this is a really nice shot that I can remember. This is where you stamp your cup of tea and your biscuit and just admire your handiwork. So our next challenge was to make a good functional gear linkage with a range change at work. The range change converts your 5-speed gearbox into a 10-speed. It's like having two gearboxes on top of each other. Obviously, in a truck, you need those extra gears. So we've got a worn-out road train V8 gear linkage, and we've got a pretty tight 6-cylinder gear linkage. Now, you can imagine the 6-cylinder engine is longer than the V8. The V8's 2 4-cylinders in a V formation to make 8 cylinders. The 6-cylinder is an inline 6, so it's longer. So you can imagine the gear linkage dimensions on the V8 and the 6-cylinder were different because the stick comes through the cab floor at the same point. So I had to take both of them off, strip them down, use the best range change, use the best gear stick, and make one good one out of the two. And that turned out really well. That was one of my happy moments.
Okay. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. Then you'd range it up and do it all over again. So that's all good. So another job done. Gear linkage on. That's all tight. I've just got to sort this range change out now. Wire this in.
So who doesn't love the sound of a Scania V8? Certainly with straight through pipes, they sound awesome. So we wanted to have a functioning exhaust brake because that just enhances that noise as you're going down a hill and you're using the exhaust brake to slow you down. It sounds fantastic. So we had a 6-cylinder exhaust brake that didn't work. The flap in the exhaust was seized, but the exhaust ram was in good condition. I tested it. And then we've got a V8 engine where the exhaust ram didn't work. So I had to get the 6-cylinder, measure the dimensions, look at its technical specifications, and then see would it work on the V8. And it did. Again, remarkable. Another Scania item from a service perspective that is interchangeable. What I noticed on the 6-cylinder and the V8, that the last part number of this long Bosch number was different. And my experience of looking at these components was that is generally a supersession or when the part's been replaced. But from a dimension point of view, the dimension, the bore inside, the technical specifications, it was virtually identical. So we put that on 013 at the end. And I've measured the dimensions of it. This one is 014. Generally, my experience is that is a replacement or a supersession to that one. Cheers, guys. And just about to put new intake manifold and coolant manifold gaskets on. So that's good. Hopefully tonight that'll be done. All the rocker covers are on now, valve clearances are done. So I'll be looking at painting it maybe tomorrow. I used to work with a guy called Keith Wilson in England, and he was a lovely man. He was a retired fire chief, and he was a retired transport manager for the borough council as well, where we lived. And he came to do part-time work in our parts department. I learned lots of him. I've always been lucky like that the older generation that want to share information. I don't understand why a lot of young fellas are not interested anymore. I will stand and listen to their stories and their experience because it's free, isn't it? And it's amazing the stuff that they tell you. Now, one thing Keith always used to say was record information, take photographs. And he used to be an advocate too of talking to Second World War guys that had these great stories. And he'd say, "Can I record this conversation?" It was only like 5 years later when he'd play that back and, the guy was no longer with us who was a war hero. But we'd listen to these stories and you just felt so privileged. But Keith was a real advocate of recording information. So all these extra shots that we're putting in there, that's a little ode to Keith Wilson, who's no longer with us, but a wonderful man that I learnt a lot about life from as a young fella. And what we've got there is a 6-cylinder engine sitting next to a primed up V8. And then we've got the V8 painted and then, of course, built up with everything on there. So you've got the fans, the oil pressure switch, the alternator, the air conditioning compressor. So we're all ready to go. I actually love these pictures and I think I'm going to get them put onto canvases for a house. So one track mind, but can't help it. Once you've been bitten by the Scania bug, it's hard to get away from that.
Oh, stop it. It's too sexy. It's too sexy.
So here we are again, the end of another episode. Hope you liked the video, guys. And if you did, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Remember, guys, Team 143, let's do this.